Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked the president to pardon him from corruption charges. The request sparked protests outside President Isaac Herzog's home in Tel Aviv. The opposition has warned that a pardon would weaken democratic institutions and create a dangerous precedent. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud, breach of trust and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases. He denies the allegations, which he describes as a witch hunt. Netanyahu is the only sitting Prime Minister in Israel's history to stand trial. DW's Emily Gordine joins us from Jerusalem. Emily, what are the chances that President Herzog will grant Netanyahu a presidential pardon in these corruption cases?
Well, legal experts in Israel certainly say that he simply cannot, from a legal point of view, grant Netanyahu a pardon if there has not been any admission of guilt. In a video message, Netanyahu publicly didn't admit any guilt. He published this video message following his request for a pardon. He didn't show any sign of remorse. Instead, he maintained that he disputed the charges first and foremost, and he also argued that this whole trial, these charges are fundamentally illegitimate. Now, Netanyahu essentially framed his pardon as, as something that is in the good, as good for the country, as a way to mend the rifts in Israeli society that is admittedly very polarized. But you could argue that pardoning him could have the opposite effect. We saw people protesting outside the president's home in Tel Aviv following this request for a plea, with many saying that Netanyahu does not stand above the law. Now, President Isaac Herzog is now seeking legal counsel on this request for pardon. There is some speculation that he could issue a conditional pardon. That means pardoning Netanyahu, but he would then have to, for example, step down from the political sphere. But again, he is seeking legal counsel on this now, and it will take a few weeks until we hear an official response to this request.
Emily, can you remind us, give us some background on these corruption charges hanging over Netanyahu?
Well, Netanyahu was indicted in 2019 on charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust in 3 separate cases that are, however, somewhat interlinked. Now, the trial began in 2012 and it centers, because it's still ongoing, on accusations that Netanyahu essentially granted favors to business tycoons in Israel in exchange for gifts and favorable media coverage for himself and for his family. Now, Netanyahu himself has always denied any wrongdoing. He's framed this trial as essentially a witch hunt. But it is a case, this trial has polarized Israeli society as a whole, in the sense that many ask the question of a sitting prime minister could or should remain in power if he faces corruption allegations.
Now, US President Trump recently requested himself a full pardon for Netanyahu. Has that had any real impact here?
That's right. Trump first raised the issue of a pardon during his visit in October, when he gave a speech to the Knesset and where he directly addressed President Isaac Herzog. He then followed up with a letter 2 weeks ago, formally asking the Prime Minister to pardon Netanyahu. Just like Trump, I think, you can say that Netanyahu has also framed his legal troubles as a way of the so-called liberal deep state to oust him from office. He's called this a witch hunt. So in many ways, Israelis see this as, one friend helping out another, and it does put pressure on Isaac Herzog. But at the same time, it also increases a perception in Israel that Israel is becoming more and more of a vassal state of the Americans. If Donald Trump is now also starting to meddle with what is essentially domestic politics in Israel. This is not a security matter for the existence of the state of Israel. This is primarily a domestic issue, and the Americans, specifically the US president himself, starting to get involved in these affairs, is not necessarily seen very favourable by all Israelis.
DW's Emily Gordine in Jerusalem. We'll leave it there. Thanks.